allow me to welcome the NASAC president to give his welcome remarks, and then we'll take it from there. Professor Norbert Nkwonu,
Thank you.
You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kado. Dear Professor Masresha Feten, co-president of IAP, dear Professor Kuzu Abdella, chair of the working group, distinguished members of the working group, distinguished panelists, dear Mr. Moses Ogutu, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, all protocols observed. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this report launch and webinar on decarbonization of transport in Africa, opportunities, challenges, and policy options. This report focuses on the role of road transportation in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. It examines the broad spectrum of challenges and opportunities covering policy, institutional capacity, strategic and technological considerations, financial and social factors, and legal and regulatory frameworks. Most importantly, the report provides the perspectives on how policymakers and key stakeholders can effectively navigate and manage the complex transition towards a net zero carbon transport system in Africa. The network of African Science Academies is a network of 30 merit-based national academies in Africa. NASAC's main objective is to unite science academies and facilitate discussions on the scientific aspects of challenges of common concern, make joint statements, and provide science-informed advice to policy and decision makers in Africa. Additionally, NASA creates awareness of the value of science academy to socio-economic development and works with scientists to establish science academies in countries where none exist. NASA's networking capacity serves as an effective resource for communicating appropriate thematic information and coordinating efforts among different sectors and stakeholders in academia, policy, and society. Specifically, through its membership, NASAC continues to provide advice to regional bodies and organizations on science-related issues of importance to Africa's development. NASAC has also enhanced the capacity of academies to improve their role as independent science advisors to government and to strengthen their national, regional, and international functions. NASAC and IAP, with the sponsorship of the Climate Works Foundation and the African Climate Foundation, embarked on a study to decarbonize transport in Africa, specifically on challenges, opportunities, and policy options. The study emerged out of a November 2022 workshop organized jointly by IAP and NASAC, and builds on other studies focused on issues related to decarbonization of transport in Africa. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, it is time for science to take the lead in championing decarbonization of transport in Africa. Transportation is a vital component of our economies, connecting communities, facilitating trade, and driving progress. However, it is also a major contributor to climate change and air pollution, threatening the health and well-being of our people and the stability of our planet. At this point in time, there is an unwavering commitment and appetite by African leaders to decarbonize transport across Africa. This commitment is not just about reducing emissions, it is about building a future where every African has access to clean, safe, and sustainable transportation options. To realize this vision, we must embark on a journey of sustainable transformation in the transport sector as a whole. This report, which focuses mainly on road transportation, presents findings and recommendations that will lead to investment in modern, efficient, and low carbon transport infrastructure, from electric buses electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers and pedestrian-friendly urban centers. We need to harness the power of renewable energy to fuel our transportation system and reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels and enhancing our energy security. This will be made possible by developing comprehensive financing and policy instruments to support the upgrade of power grid system, the construction of electric vehicle charging networks, and overall improvement of the public transport infrastructure. During this launch webinar, you will hear more details about the report, its concise findings, and valuable recommendations from the expert working group. I must agree with the group that for Africa, decarbonization is not synonymous with electrification. Dear friends, as we launch this report, it is imperative to note that the road ahead will not be easy. It will require bold leadership, innovative thinking, unprecedented strategic collaboration, robust advocacy, and an innovative approach to advance sustainable transport in Africa. A unified framework for decarbonized and sustainable transport aligned with continental aspirations and global climate change targets remain critical. That notwithstanding, I'm confident that together we will build a transportation system that serves the needs of our people, protects our planet, and secures a brighter future for generations to come. In conclusion, we extend our deepest gratitude to our sponsors, Climate Works Foundation and the Africa Climate Foundation, our partner, InterAcademy Partnership, the working group members through the chair, Professor Kuzu Abdella, all staff of the NASAC, our distinguished guests, to all speakers, panelists, moderators, and all present here today. We look forward to your valuable contributions to the discussion and direct feedback on the report. Thank you all for making the time to participate. Thank you also for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Nkonu. Allow me to welcome Professor Masresha to make the welcome remarks on behalf of her IAP.
Thank you, Jackie. Dear Professor Norbert Nkonu, President of NASAC, dear Professor Kuzu Abdallah, Chairman of the Study Working Group, dear participants of this launching webinar. My name is Masresha Fettene, and I am the co-president of the InterAcademy Partnership, the network of academies of science, engineering, and medicine from across the globe. You may have known by now that the IAP operates through 4 regional networks: ESAC, the European Academies Science Advisory Council in Europe; NASAC, the Network of African Science Academies in Africa; ASA, Association of Academies and Societies of Science in Asia; and IANAS, the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences in North and South America. At IAP, we endeavor to collaboratively explore evidence-based solutions to humanity's most pressing challenges, serving as an impartial source of expert guidance on matters pertaining to scientific, technological, and health-related issues. The current report on decarbonization of transport in Africa is such one study directly related to the global problem of climate change and global warming. Our mission is global synthesis of scientific opinion on critical world problems. The study on decarbonization of transport in Africa stems from a similar study by ESAC, the European Academy Science Advisory Council, published in 2019. We started the current study by undertaking a workshop in November 2022 to identify the most critical issues in Africa that the study should explore, which resulted in this beautiful report you have at hand or in your respective screens. As indicated in the report, we aim to undertake similar studies in Asia, in the Americas, through our regional networks of ASA and EANAS, so that we can finally make a global synthesis on decarbonization of transport. The global synthesis will hopefully highlight the similarities and variations between regions and the common challenges, while also pinpointing environmentally sustainable best solutions and lessons that can be adopted and scaled up globally, and providing advice for decision makers for implementation at global, regional, and national levels. This report outlines options for gaining equitable access to clean and sustainable transportation in Africa. By doing so, it contributes to the realization of Africa's Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals. It's my sincere hope that policymakers at all levels will pick its recommendations for implementation. This study was carried out collaboratively by the Network of African Science Academies and the InterAcademy Partnership, IAP, with the sponsorship of the Climate Works Foundation and the African Climate Foundation. I would like to express my gratitude to the Climate Works Foundation and the African Climate Foundation for sponsoring the study, and NASAC for the wonderful collaboration. In particular, I would like to thank members of the working group of the study, chaired by Professor Kuzu Abdullah, for a very comprehensive and well-structured report, and members of the Secretariat of NASAC and IAP for their wonderful coordination. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mazresha, for your kind remarks, and thank you also, Professor Nkonu, for your opening remarks. Unfortunately, our chair is having technical issues, not able to join at the moment. So we need to use the next few minutes. Yes. Oh, you're there, finally. Thank you. Okay, so carry on. Professor Kuzu Abdallah, please, you have the floor. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't notice you.
Okay.
Your name. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jackie. Dear distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear attendees, dear Professor Norbert Honkono, the president of NASAC, and the co-president of IEP, Professor Morshira Faten, dear colleagues from the working group, good afternoon or good morning anywhere. I know that somewhere it is morning, it's not afternoon. So it gives me great pleasure to make a few remarks during this launch webinar of our report on decarbonization of transport in Africa, opportunities, challenges, and policy options. As the chair of the full working group, I'm truly filled with both honor and gratitude to have had the opportunity to deliberate on the content of this report with the working group and to present the output of our collective efforts. This report represents a significant milestone in our journey toward providing a perspective on the decarbonization of road transportation in Africa. Indeed, Africa continent stands at a pivot moment in its journey towards sustainability and clean climate, and this report serves as crucial guidepost along the path. Before giving the floor to the working group to delve into the report's contents, I want to underscore the importance of the issue we are dealing with. The transportation sector in Africa is a significant contributor to carbon emissions, with implications that extend far beyond environment concerns. Its impacts public health, economic development, and social constraints. Therefore, the imperative for action is clear and prescient. It is our hope that policymakers and key stakeholders in the transport sector will use it to effectively navigate the complex transition toward a net zero carbon emission transport system in Africa. Our report is the result of extensive research, collaboration, and dedication from all members of the working group. This report is not merely a completion of data, it is a call to think for a future where sustainable, clean, and efficient transport is the norm rather than exception. To this end, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to each and every person who contributed to the writing of this report. Your expertise, insights, and tireless commitment have been invaluable throughout the process. Decarbonization of transport in Africa, opportunities, challenges, and policy options report is not just a document, it's a testament to our collective resolve to address decarbonization and the role of road transportation in reducing greenhouse gas emission in Africa. It provides a comprehensive analysis of key findings and recommendations that will lead to the investment in modern, efficient, and low-carbon transport infrastructure, from electrical buses, electrical two-wheels and three-wheels, and pedestrian-friendly urban center and cities, and other new combustion motors that are based on hydrogen that we are looking for the bright future in the future. Our work is far from over. Today's launch signals not the end, but the beginning, a rallying cry for collective action. Let us not merely disseminate this report, but breathe life into its recommendation through advocacy, innovation, and collaboration. As we launch this report today, I am reminded of the importance of our shared mission. Our work does not end here. Rather, it marks the beginning of a new path in our journey. It is my hope that this report will serve as a catalyst for action, inspiring meaningful change and driving progress in our respective fields. It is also my hope that the report will be communicated, not just disseminated to the relevant transport authorities for action, but I encourage everyone present here today, listening to us, to engage with the contents of the report, to explore its implication, and to consider how we can collectively leverage its recommendation to effect positive change towards the Africa we want. We would like to see each country in Africa to be engaged deeply with the report's findings, to integrate its implications, and to chart a course of action that reflects the shared recommendations and commitments to a sustainable future of transport in Africa. For us, we embark on this journey. Let us remember that the true measure of our success lies not in the words we speak, but in the action we take. Before I conclude, I would like to also extend my appreciation to the sponsors because they are a great part of our report. Climate Works Foundation and the Africa Climate Foundation, the project teams at IAP and NASAC, they were working very hardly along the period that we are working and preparing this report. And they support us a lot of, so we have to greet them so much. All the working group members also, we thank them for the hard work they did. The peer reviews also, and everyone who supported the successful completion of this report. Thank you very much for everyone. Finally, let us celebrate this occasion and recommit ourselves to the pursuit of our shared vision. Together, I am confident that we can build a brighter and more sustainable future for all beyond our continent. Let us be the architects of change, the champions of transport sustainability, and the custodian of a brighter tomorrow for Africa and beyond. We look forward to your valuable contribution to the discussion and direct feedbacks on the report. Thank you all for making the time to participate. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuzu. Now we're done with our opening and welcome remarks. I truly appreciate the representative of the various organizations, NASAC and IAP, and also our chair. Allow me then to get us to delve into the contents of the report and to give us an overview of the report as well. I'm happy to welcome Moses Ogutu, our part of the IAP and NASAC team, but now at IAP. Moses, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Professor Norbert, President of NASAC, Masresha, and Dr. Kuzu for welcoming everybody and for the remarks. As you can see, working group that developed the report from the various different regions of Africa, from North Africa, Southern Africa, Western Africa, and East Africa as well. And they have cross-cutting expertise on the topic, from intelligence transportation, sustainable mobility, to economics of transportation, and many other aspects that relate to transportation. So I think they've done a good job in terms of preparing the report, whose finding we'll be talking about shortly. So as has been mentioned, and I won't go much deeper into the explanations again, the report starts with the identification of the challenge of decarbonization, including with the 2021 November workshop that was held by NASAC and IAP again on exploring the challenges with decarbonizing road transport in Africa. After that, of course, funding was obtained from Climate Works Foundation and the African Climate Foundation. A project team was put together, and then the report development process started. And that led us to what we have today, which is the report on decarbonization of transport in Africa. As has been explained, and as we know, Africa is a small contributor to global transport emissions. According to UNFCCC data, only marginally 4%. And we've seen that if you compare to other regions, while every other region is seeing increased emissions over time, Africa is also growing, but still remains significantly lower if you compare it to other regions. Interestingly, the average CO2 emission per person per year in Africa is only 0.8 tons, which is way much lower if you compare it to the global average of 4.8 tons. However, the emissions are increasing. If you look at the transport sector specifically, there are variances across the different African countries where we see that the leading economies of like Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, and Ghana have the highest motorization rates, which means they also have the highest emissions when it comes to the transport sector. These countries alone are responsible for 70% of Africa's emission in transport sector, according to 2021 data. But what this means is that motorization rates across African cities and across Africa generally are increasing. The result is that as the motorization rate, the rate of how many people own a car or a vehicle increase, emissions are also going up. And projections increase that this trend will continue. And what we see then is the chronic traffic congestion and the high levels of pollution. And that is what now creates the case for decarbonization. We know that climate change is rising, and we know that we have to meet the Paris Agreement and the nationally determined contributions and national long-term climate strategies of African countries. Decarbonization of transport is also very much crucial to the realization of Africa's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And it's very much complementary with our achieving of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the many African Union and regional transport frameworks and climate frameworks like the Nairobi Declaration, and many of the existing strategies like the CCR DSAP of the African Union. We'll be talking about those shortly. Now, what is the benefit of decarbonizing road transport? We know that Africa, I mean, we have we have challenges that we face. In as much as decarbonizing road transport help us meet climate change mitigation and climate adaptation and reducing pollution, it also has very significant social benefits, be they in the area of public health, be they in the area of increased equity and access to socioeconomic benefits, but also more importantly in improving access to transport, which, as some of our presidents have said, are very crucial to our economic growth as a continent. I think transportation drives every sector of the economy, and sustainable transport is very much crucial in terms of many of the economic benefits. And of course, economically, decarbonization also has economic development and growth benefits, as we shall see in the various findings that we will present. It's got significant potential for reducing poverty and resolving one of the biggest challenges that we have in Africa, employment opportunity. We know that we have a lot of high unemployment, and with the rapid growing population and the many youth that we have, so decarbonizing road transport creates a lot of green jobs and economic opportunities for our young people, and could be very crucial for creating new sectors of industry and growth within the green transition. Now, what has our study revealed when it comes to finding? Finding one, which we have already mentioned, is that decarbonization efforts actually are already taking place across the continent. When it comes to decarbonizing road transport, so this process of decarbonizing road transport does not just start from ground zero. There's many initiatives we've seen. If you've traveled across the continent, you've seen how African countries have been very crucial in terms of coming up with climate change mitigation policies, be they policies that support non-motorized transportation, like building footpaths, building mass transit systems like trains, but we are seeing in different regions. But also we've seen a lot of our traditional vehicle industries are moving into from assembling or manufacturing of the gasoline vehicles into electric vehicles. There's also projects converting the existing gasoline vehicles into electric vehicles, because we know that Africa has, and usually many countries import used cars from Europe, Japan, or the various global north countries. So there's also like very strong efforts to convert those used vehicles into EVs. When it comes to using how to electrify these new electric vehicles, green strategies like solar charging stations are being developed, and there are also efforts to develop battery swapping stations and solar, in addition to solar charging, to address the case of range anxiety. And of course, more generally, we know that infrastructure is a big challenge in Africa, but governments are also really putting more effort into developing and improving the infrastructure systems, as we will talk about more in the one of the other findings. So this process is already taking place and is very crucial. When it comes to strategy, one of the strategic approaches that we find very useful is what is referred to as the enable, avoid, shift, improve, resilience approach. So for those ones who are familiar with the strategies used to decarbonize road transport, I think the EAC approach is very well known, where you talk about the enable, avoid, shift, improve. Now, when it came from this study, we found another element, which is the resilience element, which we add to the strategy as being crucial when it comes to the specific contextual needs of Africa. So while the enable approach focuses on establishing the foundational elements like governance, laws, the existing financial arrangements that are necessary for decarbonizing transport, avoiding element is focused on reducing the need for the distances. For example, maybe instead of taking a bus where you can walk, you end up walking, but also it also looks into aspects of urban planning and the adoption of remote work practices where possible. The shift element encourages you to move from your individualized demand-driven mode of transport to more sustainable aspects like public transit, walking, and cycling. Improve focuses on enhancing the efficiency and environmental performance of transport systems. For example, moving from gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles, using efficient fuel system if you have to use fuel. And the resilience aspect that we focused on is actually aimed at enhancing the resilience and adaptive capacity of transport infrastructure. And this is very crucial because even when it comes to three-wheelers, the motorbikes that are being widely used on the continent, what local manufacturers have realized is that the motorbike, to use as an example, the motorbike as is developed in China or India and being used there may not withstand the actual radical or terrains, or for example, of rural Africa. So what these local manufacturers are doing, they're actually remodeling those and making them in ways that respond to the contextual needs. If we want it to survive rough road, which is not marramed, then we have to design it that way, but also recognizing, for example, how people use them. But this is also focused on building the resiliency of the infrastructure system in the various regions. So we find that this is one very crucial strategy when it comes to decarbonizing road transport that can be adopted, should be adopted. As in finding three, we find that there are already policy and regulatory instruments which are being crucial to decarbonize road transport. And African governments, as we mentioned earlier, have actually recognized this, and they are utilizing a diverse range of policy instruments to accelerate the process at both the continental and local levels. This can be divided into market-based instruments, such as taxes, maybe providing tax waivers for like EV manufacturers, subsidies, fees, quotas, import duties, penalties like on importation of used vehicles, for instance. There's also regulatory tools like licenses, limits, prohibitions, laws, and direct provisions where the governments can directly provide goods or services to the citizens. And more importantly, the aspect of information provision, because governments have taken the role in some countries with directly disseminating relevant, accurate, and timely information. And so we find that policies and regulatory instruments are very crucial in decarbonizing road transport. Another finding that we find, finding 4, and I think I already mentioned some of these as part of finding 1, the local assembly and manufacturing of EVs, the conversion of ICE vehicles to EVs, which are very crucial for driving industrial growth and creating green jobs, in addition to the usual environmental and social benefits. I'm going to share some images in the next slide to talk about, for example, when you talk about local assembly and manufacturing of electric vehicles, this is just an example of companies like in Kenya, like Roam or Basigo. There's companies like Kira in Uganda. There's other companies in Nigeria and in South Africa that are actually doing actual manufacturing of electric vehicles. And you see that these are like big buses for moving mass movement of people. And of course, they are creating jobs leading to economic growth, but also, and this is a very interesting project that one of the working group members has been part of the team spearheading in South Africa. And we know there are similar examples across various African countries, the conversion of existing gasoline vehicles to EVs. So you can see there, a very traditional Nissan that uses gasoline is transformed into a fully electric one locally. And the same has been done for motorcycles. The same is being done for three-wheelers or the tuk-tuks as we know them. And what is interesting with this kind of research, especially like the one in South Africa, is that there's actually research going in to calculate the economics and efficiency in terms of what range this vehicle can reach, as well as the utilization rate, especially when it comes to paratransit, which is the most commonly used form of transport in Africa. When it comes to addressing issues like range anxiety, because part of the decarbonization process is also utilizing efficient systems like electric vehicles. And as we will talk about this in the next finding, is that there's the challenge of range anxiety, which is the fear of running out of power. So locally, there have been innovative ways of dealing with range anxiety issues where electric vehicles are being used as part of the decarbonization process. In this image that I'm sharing, the first photo up there shows what is called Roam Hub in Nairobi, in Kenya, where it is not necessarily a battery swapping, but the gentleman you're seeing in the photo there is actually putting his battery, picking up something that they use now to put their own battery in the motorbike. And they're actually able to do, they're given a particular block component or tech that they can use to charge their own electric bike battery at home instead of going to charge it at specific places. But also in the second image where you see ampersand swap station, and I find that interesting because of where it is strategically positioned. On the one hand, you find the ampersand swap station. If you look keenly, you see a sign of Total Energies. So there's a gasoline station next door there. But also if you look keenly, you see a power solar EV power station. So this is put strategically such that let's say you had a hybrid vehicle, you can decide whether you are swapping your battery or you are charging with solar, etc. Although the ampersand station is focused on battery swapping for two-wheelers, which are the motorbikes, which are quite widely used. The last image down there is what some people in South Africa are trying to do. The whole idea that you could be able to, if you are driving long distance, let's say in a deep rural where there's no place to find power or charging station. As you know, most parts of rural Africa, it might take you a long driving before you arrive at any town. So you can swap, you can carry an extra battery to use on your way. Of course, the contexts are different. In some areas that might be useful, in some others that may not be. But this is just about adopting local solutions to local problems. And that's a good transition to finding 4, where we find that electrification of transport is raising various concerns, especially because of the fragile grid systems that we are having in the African continent. So if electrification is to be used as a strategy and electric vehicles are to be adopted, we know that would result in increased electricity demand, which would strain the already fragile grid. And this has implications for charging infrastructure, hence the fear of running out of power, range anxiety. And electrification of transport really has concerns around every aspect of the grid system. It will result in increased power demand that will strain the generation system. So would be the transmission system and the distribution of system itself. So this is a big challenge, and we find that very few studies have actually been done to specifically investigate the implications of electrifying transport on the grid system. As you can see in the chart, Africa is already one of the regions with the lowest access to electricity as a share of the population. So this is one area that will require addressing as part of decarbonization strategies. Finding 6. So if we are to electrify transport, we find that targeting high mileage and the most extensively used vehicle segments can accelerate adoption of electric vehicles. When we talk about most extensively highly used vehicle segments, I think we are referring to the African paratransit system. They have different names in different countries. We know in South Africa they are called taxis. In Kenya they are called matatus. They have the same different names, like I think Danko in Ghana or Senegal, Okada in Nigeria. And so this refers to like either the buses you're seeing or, the most rising, which I think most cities are using now, is the motorbikes, the two-wheelers, as well as the tuk-tuks, the three-wheelers. So it would be crucial to perhaps start by targeting these extensively used and high mileage systems before gradually transitioning to other four-wheelers like personal vehicles. Although this does not mean that effort should not be taken to discourage four-wheelers, as seems to be happening in some countries and will be talked about briefly. And then we also find that an integrated sustainable transport strategy is crucial. We cannot just talk about electrification of transport, because decarbonization is not synonymous to electrification. What we need is a holistic approach that involves the inclusion of mass rapid transit, like the BRT buses, bus rapid transit, light rail like metro, a strategy that integrates urban planning, like compact land use, smart city systems that actually respond to the idea of avoid, improved, shift, resilience approach, improving existing transport systems and infrastructure, because like I said, many of our rural and even urban roads in the continent have very unique needs, and many of them do need improvement. But one thing we have to acknowledge is that governments are actually already doing a lot of efforts to try and improve infrastructure, redo their urban planning. But this should be done as part of a broader strategy that also thinks about the transport system, not just what it is now, but future mobility needs, future urban expansion needs, because we've seen data talking about how African cities are expected to grow as population grows. And we know that Africa currently has probably the largest rural to urban migration happening. Many people are moving to cities, but the cities are not that, as they currently are not able to, unless expanded and properly planned, might not be able to respond to those dynamics. So we need a larger integrated sustainable transport strategy that incorporates all these elements. So that takes us to finding 8, where for us to do all these decarbonization efforts that we're talking about, finance is required, and finance is a major challenge. So different financial strategies and frameworks are needed, and the absence of them currently restrict the potential for decarbonization. As an example, you can see in the chart just the cost of implementing nationally determined contribution of African of various African regions, and that finance is not there. What we have is what the countries themselves contribute to the process, and what exists currently, as most of our working group members would comment on, is very insufficient to facilitate the process. One other finding, and one very major important thing that we know we are facing, and the report finds to be very crucial, is industry resistance. As with many sustainability transition strategies, whether it is moving from gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles, or even currently the work from home, or any aspects of transition, we have entrenched regimes. These are the dominant actors, the policies, the practices, and the rules of the game that have established powerful interests. And these are sometimes resistant to change. As we've seen, and I think in Africa, when it comes to decarbonization efforts globally, the fuel and fossil fuel industry is one, and so is the existing auto vehicle manufacturers. Manufacturers, and in the case of Africa, is the sellers, whose revenues and whose business models require significant change. So unless they are incentivized through the various incentives, you're talking about market-based instruments, policies, etc., the decarbonization process will face challenge. So industry resistance is a major thing that requires bringing up stakeholders together. The chart that is being shared here is what is called the multi-level perspective, a framework normally used for complex sustainability transition. So you see how on one hand, at the level down there, there's niches, then there's regime, and then there's the entire landscape. So the regime can be incentivized. The ideas like decarbonization first emerge, then there's diffusion processes happening, and then an actual reconfiguration of the system of the rules of the game happens, which is eventually now, this could be the case, for example, moving from gasoline vehicles to eventually electric vehicles, or shifting people's mindset from moving from using personal cars to public transit or walking. And we know that many people in Africa, of course, walk. So industry resistance is a major challenge, and I think we will be able to talk about this more and address the questions during the breakout room or panel session. Now, finding 10, which is the last finding, we find that adopting a common position on sustainable transport can accelerate progress. And adopting a common position really does not imply a one-size-fits-all policy, but it could be the driver that is based on shared principles and recognizing the diversity of various circumstances and with flexible implementation aspect. And the African Union already has some existing policies. They do not necessarily directly focus on transport. For example, the overarching climate change and resilient development strategy and action plan has some transport elements to it. And so it provides a larger comprehensive framework for climate action, including transport in Africa, but transport is just one of the elements. So what we see is that a distinct strategy that is fully dedicated to sustainable transport might be useful in aligning the both continental and global objectives. And then it could be used to prioritize collective bargaining, especially when it comes to financing decarbonization and countries working together and shared learning and experiences for the process. So this brings us to the key recommendations. These recommendations are based on the finding. So it's crucial to implement the enable, avoid, shift, improve resilience approach. There's a need to provide incentives to industries and to the stakeholders to promote and support local manufacturing. We need research partnerships to investigate energy demands and the impact of EVs on the grid, comprehensive financing and policy instruments to support, for example, the upgrade of power systems, EV charging networks, and of course, the overall public infrastructure. And we've talked about the need to prioritize the electrification of those vehicle segments that provide the most and immediate benefits, and structure rules and regulations. And of course, all this should happen within the framework of just transition for it to be holistic and socially inclusive. In the interest of time, I think conversations like this work good when we now move to the panel session where questions can be answered and more insights can be shared by the working group members that develop the report themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Allow me to welcome the panelists, working group members, as well as Evans, who would moderate the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, and thank you everyone for creating time to attend this important launch event. I really appreciate everyone who has actually joined. And I know from this launch, you'll come up actually with a lot of knowledge, and actually then you'll have a proper understanding of what the report is all about. You've heard from the presentation already that there is a lot of appetite for African nations to decarbonize. So in that case, we had a team, we formed a team that really had to go out of their way to work on this report Africa-wide. And we had the working group that we selected that really had to make sure that this report reaches where it is. So allow me to acknowledge the working group members that we've tirelessly worked with on this report to make sure that it is where it is at the moment. So quickly, before I introduce the working panel, I'll just wish to inform you that we had 10 working group members. We had the chair, Professor Kuzu. We have Professor Thinus. We have Dr. Samuel Bwalia. We have Professor Chooks. We have Dr. Mafini. We have Mr. Daniel Essel. We had Aki, Professor Aki. We have Ms. Irene Radukunda. We have Ms. Irene Karani. And then we have Dr. Ahmed Osama from Egypt. So this team has really worked around the clock to ensure that this report reaches where it is. And just to inform you that I was the co-study director of this report, and we've really come up a long way with them. So we've really come up with a strategy that will make sure that the findings and recommendations that are coming from this report will actually serve the African continent. And it is in this regard that I'm happy to introduce my panelists who are actually coming in to really assess the significance of decarbonization of transport towards a sustainable development in Africa. The first panelist will be Dr. Ahmed Osama from Egypt. Then I'll have Professor Thinus Booysen from South Africa. Then I have Dr. Mafini Dosso from Cote d'Ivoire. Then I have Dr. Samuel Bwalia from Zambia. And then I have Ms. Irene Karani from Kenya. Then after the Q&A session, I'll bring in a policymaker who has actually done a lot of policy advices to various governments in Africa to give us now a view of what now needs to happen going forward. And is called Professor Abubakar Sani Sambo. So at this point in time, I'll give all the panelists, starting with Dr. Ahmed Osama, 3 minutes, just to tell this team what needs to be done to accelerate decarbonization in Africa. Osama, Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you, Evans, and thank you, Moses. Can I share something? Can you enable me to share something?
Oh, you wanna share a screen?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Yeah, that's okay. I'm trying to see how to give you the permission. I think when you start sharing, it should give me a prompt to allow you to share.
Okay, I'm trying to share what it says. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So
You should be able to do that.
now it's working. Okay. Okay, so I'd like to build, so I believe everyone can see the screen, right? Okay, so I'd like to build upon what Moses have mentioned and try to elaborate more that decarbonization is not only about e-mobility, especially in Africa. So Moses mentioned the enable, avoid, shift, improve, and this approach, EASI, enable, avoid, shift, improve, can have a big impact on decarbonization in Africa. So from the report, from the types of policies that we included, for example, for the avoid strategy, is implementing low carbon transportation policies like low emission zones, congestion charging, and parking policies, as well as promoting sustainable free transport. So this can be a good way in order to shift demand from motorized modes of transportation into other sustainable modes. However, in Africa, we are a bit lagging regarding these policies. Although it can have a big impact, we can see that most of avoid strategy policies are concentrated in Europe, as well as some in Asia. But in Africa, it's a bit lagging. So for example, I may give some examples from Egypt. We had this study regarding low emission zone, but it had always been theoretical. It has never been practical. So we need to have these decisions regarding implementing pilot projects regarding something like the avoid strategy. Regarding shifts, again, shifting to more sustainable modes like transit as well as active transportation, again, we have a very big opportunity in Africa applying a shift strategy towards active transportation and transit. And this actually figure shows why active transportation and transit is really important. I don't want to say more important than e-mobility, but it has a big importance regarding regarding decarbonization in Africa. We mentioned in the report some policies like investment in public transit and how to motivate and encourage public transit for the government sector, and as well as some strategies like promoting compact and mixed land use development in order to actually encourage people to walk more and cycle more, as well as using different active transportation modes like micromobility, like e-bikes and all that stuff. Again, in Africa, we are a bit lagging in our sustainable urban mobility strategies. We can see that most of the strategies are in Europe and some in Asia. Still in Africa, we need to invest and we need to focus more on the shift strategy and not only on the theoretical part. For example, in Egypt, we had a sustainable urban mobility plan, but again, the decision-making took a long time and till now, it's not yet applied in the cities that was proposed. Lastly, regarding improve strategy, it's about energy efficiency of transportation mode. We need to actually have a hybrid strategies between promotion of electrical mobility through government incentives, charging infrastructure, collaboration, and so on, and actually investment in renewable energy, because both should go hand in hand. Because investing in e-mobility without actually improving the renewable energy capacity, okay, it has a good impact, but again, it needs to be a bit synchronized and hand in hand in such. Again, we need to do a lot of policies regarding improving strategy in Africa. Some cities globally have already put deadlines regarding ICE, like for example, Netherlands by 2030, Scotland again by 2032. So we need also this type of strategies in order to move forward with the improved strategy in Africa. I would say that along with the avoid, shift, improve, the most important part is the enable, which is what Moses mentioned in the first place. We need to have actually good capacity building programs in order to train governance officials and in order to put practical policies in order to implement this avoid, shift, improve strategies well in our African countries. Thank you. I don't want to take much more time. So thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Ahmed, for really clarifying on some of the efforts that needs to be done to actually accelerate decarbonization in Africa. Now, we've actually come now, from that we are actually hearing about the resilience of the grid, yeah, on how now we need to do mass electrification on vehicles. At this point in time, I wish to bring in Professor Thinus Booysen, so that he can talk about the energy resilience, and actually as he maybe tackles the question the participant has asked about the viability of connecting ICE to EVs. Thinus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Evans. I want to start off by maybe just speaking to the importance of doing this report in Africa, by Africans, for Africa. Especially given the electricity demand and the fragility of the grid. What we've found in a lot of our research is that in the African context, the electricity makes up a very big part of mobility, and the fragility of the grid is actually more important than what you would assume in developed countries. Now, I want to also just add that us as a working group are not necessarily the people using public transport the most. In the same way that Africa is not one country, and you can't assess Africa as a single country looking from a European or American perspective. We also have to be very careful to, from within Africa, assume that other countries are the same as ours, right? So in the electricity perspective, I think the thing to acknowledge is that our infrastructure is not necessarily set up to carry the extra burden of electric vehicles. But with that challenge comes the opportunity also to have additional investment in electricity production. And the big opportunity with that challenge is that we need to ensure that that additional production of electricity is green. As two of my colleagues have already said, electrification in Africa is not the same as decarbonization. It is crucial that any additional production of electricity and energy must be green. And then the other thing I want to touch on real quick is Moses did a very good job of summarizing the report, and he mentioned local production of vehicles. And I think in the same vein, it's important to note that the electrification of transport in Africa gives us the opportunity to locally produce vehicles, yes, but also to locally produce energy. Currently, our energy supply is from abroad, except for Nigeria and maybe Sudan. A large chunk of the energy production is actually imported when it comes to transport at the moment, and that's going to fall away. Let me also then just say another big thing that makes Africa different is the fact that we have the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. It's something that is different, and it's something that doesn't get enough attention. And looking at electricity fragility, it is crucial to understand that, especially for the informal transport sector in Africa, it's very difficult to establish when electricity will be needed, where. So at what times will people charge and how will they charge? And these things will be different in the African environment than what they are in a scheduled and structured transport system. So those are some challenges that are worth exploring further, and some of the things that we highlight. Thanks very much, Evans.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, Thinus. Participants, you can hear electrification is not decarbonization. And this report has really come out clearly and actually to justify why that statement is correct. Now, as Africa uptakes the uptake of decarbonization, a lot of innovative solutions are coming into place. Now, I welcome now Dr. Mafini Dosso, as she talks about transport and innovation. She may be looking also at ways of now looking at giving this team some of the strategies, innovative strategies and technologies currently being deployed. Over to you, Mafini, Dr. Mafini.
Good morning, bonjour from Abidjan. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thanks a lot to the project team and to the sponsors. And as my colleague Booysen just said, written by ourselves, even if we are not regular user of the public transportation, it's been also an important bridge. Because reading on what Kenya, Rwanda are doing, and from Cote d'Ivoire, also it was very interesting in this report because we could also bridge the different Africas, as my colleague just said. So I had the very pleasure to contribute and to learn more than contribute with the different colleagues. And I would like to underline only 3 points. The first point is point 0. It's my birthday today. So when I heard that the launching of the report was today, I was like, okay, my destiny may be to work in the decarbonization of transport. So that was the first point. It was not planned in the report, of course. Most importantly, Moses well underlined, and also Ahmed and Booysen underlined that actors of African innovation ecosystem are already adapting and deploying novel technologies and innovative business model. And we learned also from the report that locally, those are already game changer on our path towards sustainable transportation. What we also observed, and this is, I think, is also another matter of what we should fight for, is that the innovation, the diffusion of innovation in the decarbonization of transportation is very spatially, geographically, and socially concentrated. So the way we can bridge also the innovation ecosystem in Africa will also be very determinant in the future of the decarbonization of transport on the continent. The second point is that it's very important for technology transfer, knowledge transfer across countries and across continents, is that it is based on the knowledge of the local context that these innovators in Africa are able to bring solutions to reduce the carbon emission, to alleviate the externalities, or to improve the reliability, the efficiency, the accessibility, the inclusivity, and the affordability of the different transport means. So where I think we should also look at, and this is my third point, is that we don't know yet a lot about the innovative startup on the continent. From our latest estimation, not of course they are cited in the report, but they are not originally based on this report. We find that there are more than 500 startups operating in the transport and logistics sector, and we also know that they receive more than $1 billion in the last years in terms of venture capital. So they bring different solutions, including passenger solution, logistics, or multi-tier system. And doing that, we have to admit, and this is another finding, I think, of the report, is that they are already responding to core SDGs, such as SDG number 3, number 9, and 11, meaning for the quality of life, health, for the infrastructure and innovation, but also for the sustainability of our cities and our communities. And this solution for the decarbonization of transport, and I think this was another important finding, is that they're not only responding to issues in the transport or logistics sector, they are also responding to secondary SDGs, such as energy, such as water, or even education. So it is not only about decarbonization of transport, is not only about transport, and I think this was also another finding of the report. And lastly, I would like to underline 3 other points, is that the innovation my colleague underlined, you can see that in our local context, they are very ambitious. They're trying to be inclusive, but they're also trying to push for innovative and anticipatory governance and for the skilling and reskilling of human capital. So on this, I would like just to again to thank all the colleagues from which I learned a lot during the conception of this report. And I hope that we could push for more research on how innovation is diffused and the barrier of innovation in the various contexts of decarbonization of transport in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mafini. Participants, you can hear that it's not just about reducing carbon emissions. There are so many advantages, there's so many benefits if we go decarbonization way. Now, having said that, now what should African countries do to ensure that this baby called decarbonization is not lost out in our shelves? Allow me to introduce Dr. Samuel Bwalia, who will actually tell us now the policy options and implications with regards now to this report. Over to you, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Evans. Yes, and thank you very much, Moses, and my other colleagues that have spoken before me, for presenting the report and highlighting some of the major findings of the report. Of interest, of course, is that the report is attempting to accelerate the decarbonization. And I think embedded in that word of accelerating is a request to look at a menu of policies that governments can adopt, to promote sustainable transport, and along the way, decarbonize the transport sector. I will not highlight all the policy options that are in the report, but I just want to, for the purpose of discussion, highlight some of the common trends in this space in Africa. The first is that almost all African countries are facing quite constrained fiscal space, to find money to spend on things like transport, invest in transport systems, invest in energy, invest in social infrastructure, education, and health. So the quest to invest more money into transport, requires innovative solutions. And one of them is to acknowledge the fact that there is a huge bill that African countries basically spend on fossil fuels. And there lies a space where you could utilize some of the revenues that could be saved from there and re-engineer them back into providing the fiscal space required to invest in infrastructure, for instance, or in energy, or in transport and mobility and stuff like that, to accelerate the decarbonization agenda. So that is common across Africa. The second is that if you look at the movement in prices between the conventional vehicles and EV vehicles, we are almost approaching the parity, where the vehicles basically are costing almost the same. Now, the biggest component for electric vehicles, at least on a daily basis, is the batteries. And my colleague Mafini did talk about the importance in investing in manufacturing either batteries or electric vehicles and stuff like that, and boosting that local capacity for green investment in that sector. And one of the areas where we want to see innovation is innovation in the battery technology, so that we can lower the cost of producing the batteries and invariably incentivize purchasers of EV vehicles to make that decision, which is a transition decision. So in there again, is a menu of policies that African countries can look at. They can, for instance, look at policies that basically disincentivize, investment in green energy, for instance, investments in battery production or EV vehicle production, but also purchase of EV vehicles. There are a few countries currently that are subsidizing fossil fuels, even when the fiscal space does not require them to do so. So again, you have a silver line in there to re-examine, some of those policies and see if they can redirect those investments into areas which can promote the adoption of electric vehicles or, promote sustainable investment in transport and stuff like that. So on the financing side, that can be very, very helpful. On the other side of the coin, a number of countries, including Rwanda and several others, are subsidizing. They are reducing taxes on EV vehicles. So that is also helping, incentivizing consumers to transition. So again, a number of policies are there. Some of them are regulatory instruments. Some of them are banning vehicles that are second-hand vehicles of a particular age to come into Africa because these are most polluting and therefore contributing to the agenda, the climate, action agenda. So that should be applauded. What is actually missing currently is that we don't have a unifying framework for decarbonizing transport in Africa. And I think for colleagues that have participated, that are joined in, I think the message is loud and clear. Let's engage, through our regional bodies, intercontinental bodies like the African Union, even at the local level, galvanize efforts to at least once have a common framework for developing sustainable transport in Africa and for decarbonizing Africa's transport. Because once we have a common framework, then it's very easy for us to localize that, through the regs, localize that, through national systems, and also provide a platform for partnerships, for partners to come on board and say, here are the challenges, and this is the missing policies. How can we come on board and support this global effort? But it's not just about Africa decarbonizing transport, but there are global benefits for doing so. So we need a global partnership and a framework for doing that. And I think the report has provided this in their finding on number 10. And I hope that this recommendation will continue to be communicated to a number of our partners. I think the second, my last point on this, is talk about social inclusion. Now, it's very difficult to parade, push through a policy on decarbonization if you don't recognize the political economy issues, that are varied across countries. And one of the issues that politicians are very sensitive to in adopting policies is social inclusion. And the policies we are talking about here must be seen to be socially inclusive. So talking about, urban-rural connectivity, infrastructure development, prioritizing those, talking about safety for passengers, talking about safety for cyclists and the people that are walking, using motorbikes, and basically providing equity in transport expenditures. Public transport expenditures is important. If you see currently expenditures are tilted to motorists, and there's very, very little expenditure going to, people that are cycling. So again, this is an area for Africa where we can promote social inclusion for these aspects of transportation that receive very little share of the national budget. So maybe not to be exhaustive, let me leave it there. And I think we'll have an opportunity to look at some of the policy prescriptions that have been provided in the report as our participants join in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Participants, you can hear, we seriously need policies that will help us drive this decarbonization agenda. And just in connection with what Dr. Samuel has just said, we really are now bringing in Irene Karani, to now give us more, now to tell us these challenges we are being told. How do we mitigate them? Over to you, Irene.
Thank you very much, Evans, and to my other colleagues who have talked before me. So I just want to emphasize 5 points on policy. One, policies will have to be customized per country because the country context is completely different. What is good in Rwanda or Kenya may not be what is good in South Africa or Chad or Senegal. So if you stem from an NDC perspective and you look at the way countries are, have put forward their NDC targets, you can already see that it will be quite different. And it's very important to customize decarbonization policies along a country's context. So that is very key. The second point is that transition policies like of decarbonization are going to be disruptive. It's not going to be smooth sailing, and there will be opposition, especially from the oil and gas sector. And there will be disruption in the business models, there will be disruption in the industrial sectors. So they will be disruptive, and you can imagine the resistance. One of my colleagues talked about the resistance that will be faced when we are decarbonizing, because most of our economies in Africa, rely on the oil and gas sector to drive our economies. So there will be resistance. So they will be disruptive, and we need to think about the type of disruption and how to mitigate it as we embark on establishing new policies. Now, the third point is that any policy on decarbonization of transport will need to be holistic. It needs to have a systems approach and thinking about the entire value chain. It's not about just cars. It's about materials. It's about people. It's about electrification. It's also about environmental protection and climate, impacts, because we can decarbonize and cause problems in other sectors. And that is, I don't think, the way we want to go. So you need to look at the whole policy environment holistically in conjunction with other policies. I know in a lot of African countries, and this is not particular to any country, we tend to look at policies in silos. But as we are moving forward in the climate discourse, this is not going to be possible. Climate is affecting all policies, all sectors, and we need to move forward thinking about it holistically. Now, the fourth thing I want to say is that as we are decarbonizing and as we are thinking of how the policies need to be harmonious with other policies, stakeholder inclusion is key. We have talked about social inclusion. We need the public sector, we need the private sector, and we need civil society. Public sector for obvious reasons, because transport is a public good. Private sector, they are part of the innovation. They are part also of financing some parts of the decarbonization, the decarbonization journey. And civil society, the needs of the common man who we are hoping to serve need to be on the table. Because we can decarbonize and we can have the right policies, but are disenfranchising the very man on the ground, the grassroots person who is going to be using the same transport and who requires benefits from the same transport sector. So we need all three on board. So having multi-stakeholder platforms at national level and at regional level will be key. And the last point I want to make is, or to underscore, is the consideration of justice and equity. This is where, as we move away from the oil and gas sector, we will be taking people out of jobs that they have held for the longest time. What are we going to do with those people? Labor policies have to come into play. If we are reskilling, who are we going to reskill and what skills are we going to give them? What about social safety nets that will be there for people who cannot be reskilled, right? And establishment of new decarbonized industries will need to take into consideration the labor force and how to offer more green jobs that are equitable and that are not disenfranchising other parts of, of communities or whole communities. So advocacy for a system-wide policy shift and a mindset shift is going to be necessary as we continue the discussion and more research on decarbonizing transport, and which is not only about electric vehicles, but the whole. This is going to be very crucial. Thank you. Back to you, Evans.
Thank you, Irene, for that elaborative and real to ground recommendations that you've just shared with the team. And actually, I'm just trying to line up what Irene is saying, and one of the members in the chat called Joseph Derito, who is actually saying in the chat, I'm happy that the report mentions just transition, and as a road transport workers representative, we'll need a lot of sensitization to inform more transport workers across Africa and in their trade unions, so that we have seamless just transition, leaving no one behind. And this now it really emphasizes what Irene has just said. And thank you, Joseph, for highlighting that, which actually has been now really emphasized by Irene. Thank you, members. You've heard from our panel discussion. The panel discussion is not, the panelists are not going away. And now it's now an open forum to any participant who has any question, either put it on the chat so that we can route them to the necessary panelist and any other working group member. Note that we have, need to note that we have other working group members within us who will also be able to respond to any question or clarification that will come from the participants. So as I wait for other questions, I'll just go into the chat and look at some of the things that are coming from some of the questions. Maybe this one, I'll put it to Samuel. Dr. Samuel, what policy recommendations does the report offer to African governments and policymakers to accelerate the transition towards low carbon transportation? This is a member who is asking that question, and I put it to Samuel. Maybe Samuel can take up that.
Yes, Evans, thank you very much for that question. And I think as we said, we can't customize the policies to all the countries. Each country is peculiar with its own transport challenges. But there are certain things that just don't make economic sense when it comes to developing a sector like transport and decarbonizing transport. And one of them is for instance, subsidizing fuel. First of all, countries spend a lot of money importing the fuel. Adding on to the fiscal space that they have, they can choose better to use the subsidies on fuel and invest in, for instance, renewable energy, which definitely will be required to power the electric vehicles, okay, or to invest in sustainable transport. So one of the things I wouldn't recommend countries to go into or to start to review is to review the subsidies on fossil fuels, for instance. Okay, so that's obvious. Second, is the exact opposite of that. That if we can make electrification and the rates more affordable from renewable sources, there is a public role for government to invest in electricity. Okay, so a policy of that nature would actually help expand the options and reduce things like range anxiety when it comes to charging and the fragility of the grid. So again, public policies to invest in renewable energy, infrastructure, transport infrastructure, those ones are basically common for all African countries. The third one is to consider incentivizing. And when I say incentivizing, I'm using the word properly, incentivizing local manufacturing. Because if you can incentivize local manufacturing, you democratize, the production of vehicles in Africa. Because Africa basically is a net importer of vehicles. We have an opportunity now to invest in capacities to locally produce these vehicles within Africa and to trade them across Africa within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So again, there is an option for African governments to engage collectively and support that capacity development by incentivizing manufacturing locally. Yeah, so maybe I'll limit to that, and unless there's subsequent questions on that, but that's the example of policies we are looking at that can help to decarbonize African transport.
Thank you, Samuel, for responding adequately to that question. Now, another question from the chat. This one, I think I'll give it to Professor Thinus. It's a comment from Professor George A. Giannopoulos, a member of ISAC, who says he wants to stress the utmost importance and the need to prioritize decarbonization of power, into brackets electricity generation, before speaking of decarbonizing transport through electrification of vehicles. Now, there is another question related to that. Now, that's a question, that was a comment. Now, a member asking, it would be great to know the views of the panel members on economic feasibility of converting ICE to EVs. I think, Thinus, that's for you.
Thanks very much. Yes. So first, the question about the decarbonization, or at least the comment. As I also said in the part that I just highlighted some of the report findings, it's crucial that any energy that's produced is green. And one of the challenges with renewable or green energy is that it is temporally not well matched with when we have demand. So one of the issues that we highlight in the report is also about battery storage. And I know we've mentioned battery storage in the vehicles, but this, what I'm referring to now, is battery storage at the point where energy is supposed to be delivered to the vehicle. I think that is really crucial if we want to greenify or make our energy more renewable. And a lot of the simulations we've done is actually around exactly that. To what extent the energy delivery can be improved in terms of decarbonized energy if we do have local storage. And what is fascinating about this as an option is the old batteries that have been taken out of vehicles can be used, given a second chance, as a second life battery storage for local storage. So there's a nice circular economy going there as well. And while I'm on that point, let me also mention one of the big challenges that we foresee in Africa, especially for buses, minibuses, is the replacement of the batteries after a few years. It'll be, I don't want to say disastrous, let's say it'll be really bad if we get in the next 10 years to a point where the batteries need to be replaced, and we're actually going to import those batteries, the second batteries for the vehicles, the replacement batteries. So we need to really focus at this point, as some of the other speakers have said as well, on getting the skills and getting the infrastructure in place to have localized battery production, and I mean batteries, not cells necessarily, batteries, for the second replacement of the batteries in the buses. And this is something that we're also actually focusing on at the moment. In terms of the second question from Dr. Gaurav from Oxford, it is really challenging financially to make sense of a retrofit. But weirdly, the two questions are very closely related. The retrofit of a vehicle is obviously one where you take a petrol and diesel vehicle, strip it out and make it electric. But in terms of replacing the battery of an electric bus after 10 years, you will have to replace a lot of the control electronics. You'll have to replace the cluster, for example, the display cluster and the battery, because not all the components will be interchangeable. The CAN bus communications will be encrypted. And effectively, what you will be doing after 10 years is retrofitting an electric vehicle with an electric vehicle. So these questions are not unrelated. That's a very weird way of answering the question, but basically, Dr. Gaurav, it's not financially feasible unless you achieve scale. And to achieve scale, you need the same type of vehicle to be retrofitted. Now, in many of the countries, we have the same vehicle inside that country that can be scaled up to retrofit. But in order to do so, you need to overcome quite a few challenges. Things like you don't know what the state of the vehicle is. So the whole vehicle will first have to be checked, be certified. And I'm sure anybody who spent any amount of time on African roads will attest to the fact that the vehicles aren't always in pristine condition. But with that also comes the opportunity. If we can build the skills to do these retrofitting and ensure that the standards are met, then scaling it up will become an issue of employment. And the cost of using lower skilled labor to do so will probably be beneficial as well. For example, if you drive around in Senegal, if you go into the rural areas, you'll find very young people working on petrol and diesel vehicles, and they will probably have to be reskilled. But if they are, they can be used to do retrofitting exercises, as long as it's an easy copy and paste job. And in each country, like I said, we've got pretty much homogeneity across the public transport vehicles. So sorry, that's a very long answer, but I think yes and no, but it's very, very difficult to know, and possibly because of the low cost of labor in Africa, it's feasible.
Thank you, Thinus. I think you really answered it well. Now, I think I'm now giving an opportunity to any member with participant who can actually, who can unmute and respond, ask any clarification or question to the panelists and the working group. You can raise your hand if you can raise your hand so that I can see you. Any member of the panelists, participants who would wish to directly ask the panelists a question?
Evans, I see several hands have been raised. George Gianopoulos' hand was up, as well as Francis Mwangi.
So can I start with Francis Mwangi? Unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, panel members and professors and delegate. I'm very happy for this report. It's very informative. My question is in regard to the scope of the study, because it says the study says the transport sector, but I have looked at it, and in the transport sector, we have other key three modes of transport. We have railway, we have air transport and maritime, which I've seen is not clearly covered in the report. Now my question is that maybe we can look in the future, how can it be improved in terms of covering other mode of transport, because decarbonization and also improving development and growth, we need especially railway. Like if you look at Europe did not develop because of road, but because of the railway. The interconnectivity is what we need in Africa to ease. So my question is to regard how does the report consider those other mode of transport? Thank you, as we decarbonize. Thank you. I'm Francis. I'm also a transport economist. I work in the Ministry of Transport in Kenya and a Civil Aviation Authority. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mwangi, Francis Mwangi, for accepting our invitation. It's very good when we have policy makers and decision makers within this who can actually help us disseminate this information. Now, for the question you asked, I know we had a scope of the study, and I would have wished, Moses, can you take up that on the scope of the study?
Thank you, Evans. Yeah, I think Francis, you raised a very good question. I do agree that when it comes to decarbonizing transport, especially land-based transport, there's a very big potential when it comes to mass transit and people movers like railway and the big buses, the BRT systems. So we do acknowledge some of those in the report. I think it's in chapter 4, which talks about sustainable transport. When it comes to the specific scope of the study, I think we realize that we focus on land-based transportation, and even within land-based transportation, we focus on passenger transportation with still more focus on the road. I know maybe our title may not be stating that, but in terms of the scope, the report does a good job in terms of covering road-based transport, with acknowledgement that in chapter 4 that railway transit systems, metro, are actually very crucial because they move a lot of people in one go. And I do agree, future studies, especially for the continent, are needed to maybe look specifically into the idea of the train and even more focused on the mass movement. We did not cover those other elements like air transportation, for example, because as we can agree, our air transport industry is still emerging and has a lot of issues. But also just because most of our people use land transportation more, if that helps answer your question.
Thank you, Moses. I think you actually elaborated on the scope. The scope of this was on road transport. Mwangi, is your hand still up? Francis Mwangi, or?
No, I was acknowledging. I'm happy with the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis Mwangi. Thank you. Thank you a lot. Now, George, Professor George said he wanted to tell us something. Professor George, can you unmute?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address this very interesting meeting. First of all, let me congratulate the working group that produced this report. I haven't had the chance to look at it in detail, of course, but it looks very interesting. And indeed, I like, and that's my first point, I like this holistic approach in dealing with not only mitigation measures, but also adaptation, because resilience is at the end of the 5 words: enable, avoid, shift, improve, and resilience. I haven't had the chance to see what is in the report about adaptation and resilience, but I'm sure there will be something interesting. Now, I made already the point about the need for clean electric power generation. To my mind and to our mind, when we produced the report, the similar report for Europe, was that clean electricity production is the sine qua non condition if you want to have electric mobility that is really decarbonizing. Otherwise, it is not. And I think this point was covered very well by Mr. Osama and Mr. Booysen in their speeches. The point that I wanted to bring, though, to the intention is that there is also a potential other fuel, clean fuel, which is hydrogen. And if we are talking about green electricity and green electric power, hydrogen comes to mind. And this is something that is also maybe also fit for Africa in view of the long distances with no electric charging points, which was mentioned. Maybe hydrogen in the future, not now, could fill that gap as well. And finally, one question to the panel, if we have the time. What do you think artificial intelligence will bring to decarbonizing transport? Will it be beneficial? In which way? That's, I think, something that we have to look at, because artificial intelligence now is the big thing. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, George. I think I can see now the discussion is really coming very hot, and I can see 2 hands up. I think in reaction to George. So I have Thinus and Professor Thinus and Dr. Ahmed. Let me start with Thinus.
Thanks very much, Evan. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, George, for the questions there. I think relating to your point about hydrogen and also the point about public transport, at least from my perspective, just speaking for myself now, the focus that I took when we worked on this report was, let's try to control the things over which we have control. So it's not just a scope issue of which mode of transport. It's also an issue of a temporal control issue. So are we looking at something in 5 years? Are we looking at 10 years? And in line with that, we were also asking ourselves, what is feasible economically and what will almost drive itself? As I think it was Dr. Dosso who said, to a large extent, we found that things are already happening. And to a large extent, it's economically driven. It's not really that much driven by policy. It's actually people trying to save money, trying to do things financially feasibly. And at least in my mind, like I say, my thinking was the transport sector, when it comes to air transport, will decarbonize purely for cost reasons. They don't really need incentives. They have an incentive of cost to decarbonize. In addition, it's not really in the control of African governments to control that. It'll drive itself. Shipping is predominantly controlled by other countries, not necessarily by African governments. But then also hydrogen. What we perceived, and we had this discussion quite a few times actually, is that electric vehicles is the immediate future. It's here. It's arriving on the shores, and it's already penetrating, as Tom Courtright said in the chat. If you look at the specs that they have, it's already gaining traction. And what we try to do is try to plan for the immediate future while looking at the long-term future, but trying to say what needs to be done to adapt for the immediate future with electric vehicles coming. Just finally, as a quick comment, artificial intelligence is actually something that's very useful, I think, in the African sector, especially when it comes to planning for electrical infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, the driving behavior and the mobility patterns in African transport sectors are so vastly different than what you would expect in European countries. We've actually just started in the last 2-3 months to employ artificial intelligence to analyze, understand, and replicate the mobility patterns in Africa just because it's so different. The agent-based modeling that's trained with artificial intelligence at the moment is the only way we see simulating mobility patterns, which then eventually leads to electricity or energy patterns manifesting and allowing us to plan for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Thinus, for that very elaborate clarification. Now, as we wind up our Q&A session, allow me to bring in one of the panelists, Dr. Ahmed. His hand was up, so that before I wrap up the Q&A session. Ahmed.
Thank you, Evans. I wanted first to comment on the AI, continue and Booysen point. I see AI from another perspective. I see AI in autonomous vehicles, and actually AI in the improvement of AI directly affect the spread and usage of autonomous vehicles. So when we talk about AI, we talk also about autonomous vehicles, and if autonomous vehicles are the ways, because again, autonomous vehicles depend on e-mobility, because usually AVs are electric vehicles, because it's much more easier to make an electric vehicle autonomous than an ICE, of course. So the point is that I feel that recently there have been overuse of how AVs can solve our sustainability problems regarding the environmental, because they are EVs, and regarding social, because they are more safe. Again, I see that this is somehow a stretch. I see that improvement in AI and so autonomous vehicles, actually, when we focus on that, we are overlooking the basic solutions like active transportation, like public transit. So that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that AI become very well improved, which would boom autonomous vehicles and will make us again return back to vehicles and overlook the basic sustainable modes of transportation like walking and biking and so on. And to give an example for that, actually, I was supervising a graduation project for students in my faculty, and we were designing a covered e-bike that is somehow good for the African environment regarding safety and security and all that stuff. And then one of the students still asked, why not we make it an autonomous e-bike? So that's the extent. People are actually very amazed with autonomous technology, that even biking, they want to make it autonomous, and then we will lose a big aspect of sustainability. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And now, in the interest of time, thank you, participants. We've actually taken point of all your notes. Now, just to wrap up, I think I'll give 30 seconds to my panelists. You know, it's good to leave my panelists with 30 seconds closing remarks. I'll start with Irene. 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, Evans. I think my 30 seconds is that there is no one-size-fits-all policy, and that we need integrated policies moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Samuel?
My last point is that Africa should grab this opportunity, you know, to move their own development forward and to sanitize their transport sector. There is a huge opportunity for them to look at their policies, you know, create fiscal space to invest in things like renewable energy and create jobs for their own populations. So I think it's a report which is welcome, and I think it's a report that can be taken on by a lot of African countries. Thank you.
Dr. Mafini, 30 seconds, closing remarks.
Thank you. Just want to say that, again, decarbonization of transport is not only about a matter of transport and logistics, and saying that we would need some cross-feeding of innovation dynamic across industries, sectorally speaking, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Ahmed, 20 seconds because you are the last one to talk.
I would say back to basics, active transportation, public transit. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thinus, closing remarks?
You are muted.
Unmute. Unmute, Thinus, unmute.
I was saying excellent things and then I was muted. So local production, jobs for Africa in Africa, green electricity, non-motorized transport, and gender equality in transport. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you, my panelists. Thank you for really doing a good job. Thank you, participants, for really giving in your suggestions, your questions. In case of any questions, please feel free to contact us. Now, before now, I bring in Professor Sam. Now, let's hear now the real story from the horse's mouth, from the real policy maker. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Evans. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Now, I also want to congratulate NASAC, IAP, and the working group for this beautiful report for our continent. And immediately I want to add that our leaders at the African Union Commission in 2013 came back with Agenda 2063, and major aspects of what we discussed today are contained therein. So I think we should make a formal submission with a brief presentation to our presidents at the African Union Commission. If we do that, we can recommend that for those countries that don't have agencies pushing for things like electric vehicles, they should set up one. And of course, I know you know that the major aspects to move this issue forward is to recommend that those countries that have not started should also move ahead to produce their policy, legal, and regulatory frameworks to encourage decarbonization of transport in our beautiful continent. And this contains so many things that have been discussed today, including issue of local production, issue of charging points, and so on and so forth. And towards the end, the issue of those trying to prevent decarbonization, that is those in the oil industries and automobile industries also came. And the issue of job losses should be considered. I think we should also consider this along with what several countries that are succeeding in electrification of vehicles and ensure decarbonization of transport in general have succeeded. That is by putting deadline for the local production of internal combustion vehicles, along with the issue of stopping imports of the same thing, deadline. Now, the deadline should not be frightening. It's just like our net zero targets. Several of our countries have put 2050, some have put 2060, some even 2070. So within that time, the issue of reskilling, the issue of alternatives, the issue of retirements are coming. So we should not hesitate to move in that direction. One other area that I think the NASAC and IAP could come together and do is to also make presentation to the African Development Bank. AFDB is recommending production of sustainable energy technologies, including electric vehicles and renewable energy components in some parts of Africa. And like Samuel Boyle has mentioned, to key into the African Continental Trade Agreement to market within the rest of Africa and even outside the continent. That is doable, that can be done, and I think it should be one of the steps to do. Now, one other point that I want to mention is that there is this African high-level panel on emerging technology. I happen to be a member. APET has considered gene drives, has considered microgrids, has considered a few other things and made submissions to the African Union Commission. Now, the entire report, decarbonization, may be a little bit difficult for APET to handle. I wonder if this group can prepare something. So electric vehicles alone. We have a meeting of the panel in Nairobi, 26, 27, and 28 of this month. If I can have that condensed report, we can start discussing with APET in that direction, so that the main report going to our presidents will have this smaller report also being pushed in the same direction. Lastly, I want to quickly say that what Francis Nwangi asked will be another phase. Phase one now is the issue of buses, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and maybe motor cars. Phase two, to me, will be this issue of the ships, the trains, the airplanes. They have to come eventually, because when you talk of emission from the transport sector, you don't remove the ships, the trains. You all include them. They are part of it. So eventually, the entire value chain, and not only these two classes, even with the third class, issue of tractors, combined harvesters, and so on and so forth. All those machineries that use oil and gas for them to be operable will eventually have to transit to concepts of electric vehicles. And the issue of hydrogen, Professor George explained very well. I just want to quickly add. See, if you look at the entire thing, the issue of hydrogen and the fuel cell constitutes something that is akin to deep cycle storage batteries. So to me, eventually, as time goes on, hydrogen has to come in. And lastly, I want to fully agree with Osama on AI. In this matter we are talking about, the first point of call is to come in these autonomous vehicles. Of course, it will be much later, and I hope it will be taken in. Lastly, I want to also emphasize that while most of African countries have poor electricity access, we cannot wait until the electricity access is improved. As discussed, and I fully agree, and while even contributing much earlier to some of the works that have been reported here, we can use renewable energy to ensure that as many African states come on board on this very important subject of decarbonization of transport in Africa. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Sambo, for those wise words, wise counsel, and the way forward. So this report now is going to dissemination stage. You will see us more on that. So thank you for participants for all that, for attending this occasion, and feel free to contact us in case of any clarifications and any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. I was your moderator, Dr. Evans Avedi. I hand over back to the moderator of the whole session, Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Evans, for such an interactive session and an insightful one. We're running out of time. We're actually 1 minute past the hour. Allow me to introduce Dr. Rania Kosti from IAP to be able to give the closing remarks. Hi, Rania. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. We'll do that in 20 seconds. As you said, we're past our closing time. I just want to echo everybody's comments and also give my thanks to the participants, to the presenters, the working group members and staff who worked very hard to make this this report a good product. What I want to ask all of our participants is to help us disseminate the report and the information that is in it. And I think I speak on behalf of working group members and our staff that we are very open to have similar type of webinars and meetings with other audiences, and also one-on-one discussions with policymakers, those who will eventually be acting on what the report recommends. Thank you again. I hope you have a good rest of the day, those of you who still have working hours ahead of you, or a very restful evening to those of you who are towards the end of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rania. And on that note, we just say thank you again, everyone. We want to close this session and say we are also open to the new faces that you talked about, that we can do more in terms of decarbonization of transport in the continent. Thanks our working group members, the project team. I think we will end our meeting there and say we will be in touch on email. We will avail both the slides and the report on our website, but we'll share the link with you because we now have your contact details as well. Thank you, and do have a pleasant rest of the day.